Hello and welcome to Lecture 6, which is the only lecture in week 4. Today I'm talking about qualitative research techniques. Qualitative research techniques are really interesting because they think about, qualitative research thinks about the why and how come things are and digs deeper and tries to find deeper answers. It often helps with innovation and coming up with new ideas because it can sometimes tap into things that you may not have thought about when you were just doing plain old quantitative research. This lecture doesn't 100% follow the book, as this is actually my sort of research. This is what I do. So I've drawn on a number of different sources to talk to you about today. But I would encourage you to also have a look at the book and potentially do the self-study quizzes because they should help you gear up for the online quiz, which opens at the end of this week for you for your assessment 1. I just remind you that it's critical that you complete that self-study quiz, because if you don't, you have 1 week to complete it. If you don't complete it, then you will record an absent fail for this course and this unit, and you won't be able to pass. If you try and access it an hour before it closes and you have technical difficulties and I'm unable to assist you to get through those, unfortunately that will also count as a fail because an absent fail if you haven't actually managed to attempt it. So please don't leave it until the last minute. I'd encourage you to get onto it nice and early in the week or over the weekend to get it done, because then you can offset any problems. So connection issues with the computer or compatibility issues with the computer are not acceptable excuses for not actually being able to do that. You need to be able to secure yourself a compatible computer and connection for that. So if you have any issues or difficulties, if the connection drops out or your computer blows up, something really horrendous happens halfway through your attempt, then you can contact me and I can attempt to reset the quiz for you. Hopefully it should all work well. This is the first time I've ever run an online quiz before. Hopefully it's all set up properly, but if you have any problems, please contact me as soon as you possibly can so I can troubleshoot it and make sure that it works for you. Okay, right, in this lecture I'm going to talk to you about reasoning, which is really important when you're thinking about qualitative research. I'm going to define qualitative research, think about when you should use qualitative research, and have a look at some methods of qualitative research, some of the most common ones. The reading for this is chapter 6 for this lecture, but there is also quite a lot of other resources that I put onto the in the Moodle site in week 4, so have a look at those as well. All right, and there's the learning outcomes coming from the unit learning outcomes. Right, so in terms of the 11 steps, we haven't moved from last week, determining the methods of accessing data. So last week we talked a lot about primary and secondary quantitative data. This week we're going to think a bit more about primary data in terms of the qualitative techniques. You can access qualitative data from a secondary source. I've used qualitative data from TripAdvisor reviews, which is a secondary source, and probably a lot of big data and that sort of thing is really secondary data, which can be qualitative. On the other hand, there's the primary data, which is the stuff that you actually elicit and create yourself. And so I'll be talking about mostly qualitative collection of data, but also some analysis techniques. Right, now this is kind of important. If you're at all interested in research, this will be something that you'll have to think about later on. I'm just introducing it to you now. You may have heard about it before from another unit, but I'll just put it out there now. Okay, so quantitative research is to your left. And that starts with uses deductive reasoning, and it starts with a theory. So that's like a hypothesis. You think about what it is you're going to do you have a theory, and you then create a hypothesis from it, and then you observe to see if that hypothesis is correct or not, and then you confirm it through your tests. Now, that's a very classic quantitative approach to research, and it's really good for proving truth and reality in the world, and proving that certain people spend a certain amount of money on cars, or very clear-cut kind of research like that. Now, that's really good if you know the right questions to ask, but you need sometimes to find out what the questions are that you're actually asking. So if you look at inductive reasoning, this is the way I often do my research, is that you start observing things. You might read some literature and understand that there's a phenomenon, or there's a thing that you want to that you notice or you think might exist, and so you start observing a subject or a thing, and you can observe a pattern, and that can be through communicating with people and interviewing them. It can be through watching people. It can be through a range of different ways, but you don't start with a theory, you end with a theory. So then you have a tentative hypothesis, and then you maybe go back to observation and retest that hypothesis, and that's very iterative. You can do that lots and lots of times until you come up with a theory, and that's inductive reasoning. So that's where you start with chaos and you come down to a theory. And with deductive reasoning, you start with a theory and you come out with proof. So these are the different ways, and they don't meet very well very much. There's a lot of mixed methods of research in the world, and you usually find that it starts with qualitative research, where people try and generate some sort of theory, and then they go and use that theory and test it using deductive reasoning through hypothesizing and observing, and then confirming the hypothesis. Okay, you can have a look at the website Social Research Methods, which is on the bottom of that slide, if you'd like to have a bit more of a look at or a read about that. Okay, so quantitative research has structured questions. There's a large number of respondents involved, usually to get your validity right, so you can show that you've got a representative sample, which we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks. It answers who, what, where, when, but it doesn't always uncover the why. It doesn't always elicit new and interesting things. Okay, but you do, and also in quantitative research, you need some idea of what you need to know. So you kind of, you need to have your theory or your idea pretty much sorted at the start. Qualitative research, on the other hand, is pretty much it's exploratory research. It usually tests ideas and concepts, or creates them. It provides you with deeper understandings of phenomenon or activities or actions. It often has fewer respondents than quantitative, almost always, but in the case of big data analysis, that's changing. It can uncover deeper meanings and new ideas. So back on the big data analysis idea, you might have 3 million Facebook posts that you have access to, for example, regarding the outcome of the US elections, and you can actually just feed that into a machine which analyses connections between comments and between words, and identifies patterns, and that's called an algorithm. And what that can do is actually cough out an idea that you may not have had yourself. So it can actually reveal, for example, in the case of Bella Stantic from Griffith University, he was actually able to predict that Donald Trump would become president, and I think I've mentioned that in previous lectures, because he didn't know, but he could see that these patterns were emerging from the way people were speaking to one another, which didn't correspond with what the polls were saying. So that's the beauty of qualitative analysis, and especially on a big data level. But also you can use it on a small data level. And you can enter with, well, you probably should enter with no preconceived ideas. The truth of the matter is that in qualitative research, you need to assert your preconceived ideas and just accept that no one is value free, that you do have your own ideas and thoughts, and it's best just to put those out at the front. So I've put a link there, qualitative versus quantitative research. It's just from the Statistics Learning Centre, and that's of use if you're interested in reading more or listening more. Okay, so why use qualitative research? Okay, exploration, as I mentioned, it's valuable when things aren't well defined. So you can explore problems that customers encounter if you're really not sure, you know, what in fact, even if the users can't even articulate their needs, or that the misunderstandings customers have, you might think, oh, geez, nobody's buying my tomato sauce, and you realise it's actually been on the bottom shelf of the supermarket stand for the last 6 months. Someone moved it, and you might not know that until you actually go and talk to someone. So it's for you to explore possible outcomes that you might not have thought of yourself. Although, to be honest, if you're selling tomato sauce, probably the first thing you think about is what shelf it was on in your supermarket. But anyway, all right. Complexity. Okay, so when things are really complicated and chaotic and difficult, it's really valuable to use qualitative data because you might not be able to make sense of it in really strict, firm, quantitative ways. So if qualitative data tolerates complexity really well, it helps you embrace complexity and maybe accept that not everything fits within a box. Context, that helps you understand a consumer's context and environment. You can, you know, when you see someone actually consuming a product in a context, you might then understand why they never buy that kind of ice cream, because it always melts because it's particularly hot in their car, or you never know what possibilities there are. So it can actually uncover a whole bunch of contextual issues. It might be about having children with you, or it might be about having a wheelchair, being in a wheelchair. There's a number of things that until you can actually speak to a person and understand, you might not really appreciate their specific needs within their context. Okay, explanation. When you need to explain linkages, it can be really valuable to have qualitative research. So you might understand that cassowaries eat berries in rivers, and you might understand that cassowaries poo on the jetty, but you may not understand how those two things are related. You may find that someone's collecting berries and leaving them all over the jetty, and so the cassowary is going out there to consume them and then leaving its poo. You don't really know, and if you sit there with a preconceived idea of exactly of all your theories of exactly how cassowaries act, you may actually miss a deeper story that if you actually went there and, well, maybe not talked to the cassowary, but actually observed and engaged, you may see actually something else, a specific context that might actually explain a connection between two phenomena that you can see but don't understand. And if measures don't work, so understanding a consumer's context and environment, observing users as they struggle to accomplish a goal and probing on the source of the problems helps define what ultimately needs to be measured. It's not very helpful to precisely measure the wrong thing. So as I say, it helps you know what you didn't know. And using quantitative data sometimes only helps you know what you already know. Okay, so there's 5 major types of qualitative research. There's probably more than that, but these are sort of the most common ones. You can have a look at the website there, measuringyou.com, qual methods, if you want to have a bit more of a read about those. I've drawn on that a fair bit to talk here as well. Okay, so I'll go through these. It's ethnography, narrative, phenomenological, grounded theory and case study. Okay, so ethnography can have any number of participants. Ethnography was really made famous by white dudes going and living out in Aboriginal communities and stuff like that, and they were ethnographic, so they were trying to become part of the environment. You immerse yourself in the target participant's environment to understand the themes that emerge. I have a friend who did her PhD research on brothels in the Philippines, and she actually went and lived with some ladies for a year and hung out with them and got to know them and understand them, to understand the deeper issues that were facing them in terms of sexual health and violence and safety and managing their money and a whole bunch of things that she would never have got just from going in with a survey and asking them. So there's a lot of reasons why ethnography is really good, but you have to acknowledge that everything you're observing is coming through your own personal lens of judgment and understanding that you've gained growing up yourself. It gives you the opportunity to experience the environment and connections firsthand. And like I say, you need to understand your personal viewpoint. And so you need to engage in reflective practice. So you need to reflect on how it is you do things. So you can have a look at ethnography explained through the Statistics Learning Centre again. Okay, there you go. Ethnography is writing about people. It is all about people, hanging out with people. Okay, narrative, all right? So this is, you get basically one or two people to tell their story, and you can weave it to form a cohesive story, and you can organise that thematically, or it doesn't have to be in terms of chronology. You can just weave it to form a story that makes sense. Usually you will back it up with reading documents and supporting things. So, looking at websites and that kind of thing. You look for themes, differences, tensions, challenges. So it might be that you wanted to do a narrative of a mayoral election, and you might take both sides of the politics, both contenders for mayor, if there were only two, and you might go through and get them to tell you the story, and you can see where it weaves in together, the story of how they got elected or didn't get elected, and so forth. So it's really a journalistic style of doing things, but it can actually elicit a whole bunch of information. In terms of sort of marketing research applications, there's an example here. So a narrative approach can be an appropriate method for building a persona. While a persona should be built using a mix of methods, so you can actually build, this is a typical mum and her purchasing characteristics, and you might even take a couple and you can actually weave and build a persona of typical mum, and then you might be able to look at her purchasing patterns and so forth. Okay, phenomenology is looking at a phenomenon. Okay, and a phenomenon is an event or an activity or a thing. It uses a combination of methods, usually has about 5 to 25 participants, and usually use interviews, documents, videos, and visiting places. So you're essentially just you're essentially gathering as much information you can about a thing from every source available to understand sort of deeper meanings. There we go. So how do students engage with courses, with online courses? Well, you can examine time spent and content access using log data, which is what I do when I'm looking at what you guys are up to online. And you can even assess student achievement. A phenomenological study would aim to better understand the student's experience and how that may impact on comprehension of the material. So I might not understand that some people are actually watching this lecture in their lunch hour and have multiple distractions, or they're caring for somebody while they're trying to do this. And so my assessment of how many times you access Moodle or whether you're doing well might not really give me a very good picture of what it is, your story, and how you are, coming to where you are to be here. So that's a good example of a phenomenon that you could look at. And yet again, you can have a look at phenomenology explained on YouTube if you like. Grounded theory. Grounded theory is, I've never used it, but it's really interesting to me. Basically, you have 20 to 60 participants. and you have an explanation or theory behind the phenomenon. So you're still looking at a phenomenon, but you're actually trying to build a theory. So you use interviews and existing documents, and you build a theory through identifying the themes over a series of iterations. So you talk to a person, and then maybe talk to another person, and then you might start seeing a pattern and a theory, and you might sort of think maybe this is a theory, and then you go back and maybe go and see the previous people and ask them about whether this theory might work, and then they say, no, that's not really right, or that is right, or whatever, and then you go out and you extend that out to more participants, and it's very iterative. You keep coming back, testing a theory, coming back, testing a theory, and you just keep growing until you get to a point where you have over 20 participants who are slowly coming together to a theory that's been evolved from your conversations and engagements with interviews and with documents that are available to you, like maybe historical documents or health data or a whole bunch of things like that. This example is understanding how software developers use portals to communicate and write code, or how small retail merchants approve or decline customers for credit. Well, that in particular is really interesting. So you go talk to one person, they say, we decline anybody who doesn't wear shoes into our shop. Okay, all right. So you think my theory might be that, credits decline based on footwear. Then you might go next and they say, if their clothes have got holes in them, you go, okay, maybe it's apparel in general. And then someone else says, I won't, grant credit to anyone who has curly hair. And you're right, okay, so, and so on and so forth. Or someone who's rude, or someone who doesn't show, and on it goes. And you can build this sort of theory of what the underpinning reasons are, and what you might find actually beneath all of that is that it's about trust or a confidence in someone's socioeconomic status or whatever. Grounded theory explained, probably better than me. Have a look at YouTube if you want to know more. Case study, this is the final one. So a case is to have, there's a lot of different types of case studies. There's a guy called Robert K. Yin who has written all of the most important books on case studies. So if you ever want to do a case study, you really need to cite him and say what type of case study, as described by him, you're actually going to do. And a case study basically, look, there's comparative and explanatory, exploratory. There's all different types of case studies. So you have these two case studies and you compare them. You have one and you apply a method of analysis to it. There's all different ways that you can use case studies, or you can use it as an example to show, best practice, worst practice, and so on and so forth. But the key thing for a case study is triangulation of data, which means that you get maybe a person to say something, you find out that a person will say something, you'll back that up with maybe some data analysis of your own, and also you'll read it in a newspaper article or something like that. So you use multiple sources to support that argument, and you need to sort of show that triangulation of data. Okay, case study of how a food trail was developed in one food region may provide insights and ideas for another region seeking to establish their own. I did that for my master's thesis, and I published it, and it did really well. Actually, it gets lots of people citing it. And what I was doing was trying to learn lessons, not only just about how to make a successful food trail, which had been spoken about before, but also how to make what the factors were that made a food trail fail. So I introduced both sides. So it was both a best and worst practice analysis. Case studies explained, go and have a look, and I'm more than happy to describe this further. I just don't want to keep you too long because it's relatively self-explanatory, I think. Okay, qualitative research techniques. So we've been looking at types of qualitative research. We've got the grounded theory and all these, and so these are different ways that you can go about actually collecting data. But once you've got the data, there's lots of, and this talks about a few different techniques for actually gaining the data within some of these within these different approaches, and also how to maybe go about analysing it. So these are some of the key techniques that people use. Basically, it is this is a classic. I've got a picture very much like it from Vietnam, and maybe one from Thailand. That, you know, this is just total chaos, and somehow you have to try and make sense of it. And this is what qualitative research often looks like. You just bombarded with this stuff and you've got to work out how to make it make sense of it. Okay, so observation, this is from the textbook. This is the type of qualitative research techniques that the textbook does talk about. Okay, so in observation, the researcher relies on his or her powers of observation rather than communicating with a person to gain information. So this is where you're basically looking at someone, so you can do it directly as the behaviour occurs. So you can maybe watch people in Macca's, whether they chuck their Macca's wrappers on the ground or they put them in the bin, or indirectly you can observe the results of the behaviour rather than the behaviour itself. So you can then go in and see how much rubbish is on the floor and how much has been put on the bin, so in the bin. So they're the two different ways that you can actually look at direct or indirect observation. Okay, so covert is when the subject is unaware of being observed. I think that's creepy. And there are ethical considerations. It's unless people are completely anonymous. But then, you know, mystery shopping is probably one where it's really valuable and important, where somebody goes in and observes the service level without revealing that they're actually being observed or observing the subject. Overt is when the subject is aware of being observed, and I had to use Gogglebox as my favourite TV show as an example of that. So, you know, people know that they're being watched and you can watch them watching TV and see what they like and don't like in the television. Okay, structured is deductive, so it identifies what will be recorded first, whereas unstructured is inductive, where all behaviour is observed and the themes are identified. So you observe everything and go, I've noticed an interesting trend. Every time somebody discusses pigs on television, everyone in Gogglebox closes their eyes, and you think, wow, that's an interesting thing that you weren't looking for, but maybe you observed. Okay, in situ, behaviour observed as it happens or invented. The researcher creates a situation. So you might bring people into a room and give them a situation and then you observe it from there. Right, so that's different types of observation. But there's obviously some pros and cons with that. You get some insight. So you can get insight into true behaviour, and you can get quite good accuracy, and it's it can be low cost, but it relies on you interpreting the meanings. You're really still not finding out the meanings. You can see what people are doing, but you're not 100% sure why. And you really can't guess why, because that's not your job. So it doesn't necessarily help you with motivations, attitudes, other sort of internal feelings and thoughts. Okay, focus groups. Okay, focus groups, I love focus groups. They're small groups of people guided by a moderator through discussion, either structured or unstructured, to contribute to answering the research questions. So like I've said before, we held focus groups for the tourism industry last year. We wanted to know what research they wanted conducted in Cairns, and we also wanted to know what things they needed our graduates of our master's program to be coming out with to be useful to them. So we had overall guiding questions with some key questions within that, but we allowed an unstructured conversation to go. So we actually found out more things than we thought we would actually. So the advantages are it generates fresh ideas because people are together and they can go, oh yeah, and they can go, oh, I hadn't thought about that, but we could do this, or this would be really good. And so you can actually build on ideas. It allows the people in the focus group to observe one another, but it also allows you or your client, if you're doing it for a client, to observe the participants. It can cover a wide range of issues. It's easy to access easy access to special respondent. There are easy access. So for example, with the tourism industry leaders in Cairns, it was pretty easy. We just emailed them because we know them all, and they all came along and we gave them morning tea and a cup of tea. and it's good for description. The disadvantages are that it's low representativeness. It's pretty intensive. It does depend on the moderator. You need to be really good at managing strong people quite often, and managing conversation to make sure that you stay on task and you don't wander off topic too much. And interpretation can be difficult. It's bad for prediction too, because often you can see what's what's happening now, but not necessarily what's going to happen in the future. Okay, online focus groups, bit the same, but in an online forum. So there's advantages because you don't have that physical setup and having to provide cups of tea and stuff. You can capture the transcripts in real time, so you can actually get that, recorded, so you don't have to, if you're typing, then you don't have to go through and enter it or anything like that. You can have a wide geographical catchment. Participants can be comfortable. They can sit in their own home having a cup of tea, and they have more privacy, so they might be inclined to talk about something that they might not do in a more public forum. Disadvantages are that you can't observe body language. You can't see if people are getting annoyed by the conversation and whether they're getting sick of it or bored or whatever. It's hard for participants to physically inspect products or taste food. So if you're getting them to eat a pie and find out whether they like it or not, it's a little bit hard to do that in an online forum, although you can. It's not too hard. And it is easier for participants to lose interest, and suddenly they're looking on Facebook and stuff because they're not feeling that presence of actually being in the room. Okay, in-depth interviews. One-on-one interviews with respondents can be structured, semi-structured, or completely unstructured. So these are recorded and analysed afterwards. This is really straightforward. It's a very classic style of research and good for getting exploratory answers before you start thinking about doing quantitative research. Gives you an opportunity to dig deeper for underlying issues. There's a sequential nature which allows ideas and theories to evolve, so you can actually ask questions and build up and you can actually guide people in a way to start thinking about things in a particular way, which could be a bit manipulative, but at the same time can actually help elicit deeper and bigger ideas. Another point where you probably need to actually be articulating your own personal viewpoint so you can show that you haven't got an influence in that. There's vast amounts of information gleaned across a range of topics, but that also makes it quite hard to analyse and record. Interpretation can sometimes be difficult. There is a dependence on the interviewer being good, and again, low representativeness. There's only so many long conversations you can have with people. Okay, within the types of qualitative research, I know this is going on for a long time and I am sorry, but it is really just one lecture this week, so hopefully that'll get you through. You don't have to do another one. Okay, so within the types of qualitative research, different types of analysis can be used. So there's hand coding, there's coding with computer assistance, computer-generated analysis, word clouds, and analytic memos. These are the tools of my trade. This is what I do for my research. And yet again, this is how we make sense of the chaos. Okay, so hand coding. This is part of my PhD research. You can see here, there's an image and I ask people to choose out of a selection of 30 images. So I asked them to pick the two most favourite and explain why they like them. This is a picture of Cairns Boardwalk, and so they've all pick number one. The ID is their unique identification as the survey respondent. And what I did was I started reading through, and obviously I like the ocean. That's a general like, but there's also, they've mentioned the ocean, so I've added ocean. That's then become water. If you look down at number 25, ID number 25, it's water, it's not just ocean, so I think I'll water, ocean the same, so water, ocean, and that then became sea and waves. As people mention more things, it's similar, it's the same sort of theme group, and so that's where they've classified. So natural and ocean view, over the sea, attractive, so sea, ocean view, sea. So you can see that sea and ocean view are really important to people who like that. They think that that's the nicest picture, and it's mostly because of its engagement with water. Okay, so that's hand coding. So you just literally go through, you have all your topics all your topics there, and then you just put a 1, and you can see up the top, that's the some number up the top. There's 177 people talked about scenery and a view, 128 people talked about beach and sand, 108 people talked about natural nature and unspoilt. So you can see that's how that hand coding went. So you can build that as you go, and sometimes you have to get down for a while and then go back and recode because you've added a subcategory that maybe some of those might move into. So it's pretty time consuming. Okay, coding with computer assistance. Sorry, this looks a little bit messy, but this is using, this is NVivo, this program. They're all quite expensive, the programs that you can use to do this, but critically important if you do want to do actual real qualitative analysis. So this enables you to create nodes, which is biometrics, course prerequisites, course subjects, and so on and so forth. They're the different nodes. You can create those and you can start clustering highlighted pieces of text into each one of those nodes. That can then come up on the right-hand side as being coded to a particular node, and you keep creating nodes. So it's the same basically as the hand coding method, but much more complicated and more three-dimensional because you can code, you can see one piece of text can be coded in all different ways. It's particularly useful for large pieces of complicated text like is written there. You do need training though. It's really, you're probably best to do a course if you want to start using NVivo. You can play around with it. I did, but then I lost all my work, tried again. I think probably I could have done with more training. Okay, but the other thing is that it really pays to have a bit of a strategy about how you might code from the start, and you need to be consistent and you need to make notes, and you can do that within NVivo. You can actually make coding notes to explain why you've coded, how you've coded. Okay, computer-generated analysis. Now this is really quite flash. This is sort of like the algorithms I was talking about in big data. So you need to build a logic within it, but what you do is you can, and it is quite complicated, but what we can do is you actually feed in a passage of writing and it will analyse connections between words and across sentences to see what are the most important concepts to people. It can be quite expensive, but sometimes if you're working in a university setting or a professional setting, you can access it through a sort of corporate license. So in this case, this is my PhD research. Design, urban, tropical use and space are all in a red sphere down the bottom. Red is the most central and important concept, and it goes in warmth colours. So orange is Cairns, that's the next one, Cairns Tourist Experience City and Area. This is me feeding in all of my interviews with 20 urban designers in Cairns and thinking about what they're saying about tourism and urban design. So obviously design's coming out as being really important because it was the topic of what we were discussing. And you also have to create rules in terms of the semantics. So you have to combine building and buildings and things like that into the same word. So it is quite complex, and once you're committed, it's one of those things you take a bite of the apple, you've got to take the whole apple. So it's one of those things you have to be really sure about before you start using. Okay, word clouds. I love word clouds because you can chuck in a whole bunch of text and just see what comes out of it, and it just gives you an instant idea of what you can use. It's free, it's online, and it's quite quick. And it's graphically quite nice to use when you're trying to present your data. So this again is, I think this might be maybe from my tourist surveys. I actually can't remember which thing this is from, but you can see Cairns is the largest, so that's the most commented on. Again, I've sort of said Cairns and Cairns with a lowercase, Cairns with an uppercase. I changed it all down to sentence case, so I didn't get a capital C Cairns and a lowercase Cairns because it doesn't discern between those. Or it does, which means you don't want it to, and so on. So there's some things like that, looking, all sorts of things that you might want to try and sort of merge or get rid of and things like that. So Cairns, city, place, tourist, street, different, look, experience. You can see that there's some themes emerging from there straight away. Analytical memos, yep, I think that's the end after that. Okay, analytical memos are really important, really useful, because while you're identifying thoughts and wider concepts, you can actually keep a series of memos. You reference it, you can see I've got PT page 19, that's the person who I interviewed, and the the page number where he mentioned that, so I can find that easily again. And so on with all of those. So own holiday preferences. This is my analysis again. Statements reflect ideology rather than reality. So I started making these observations that were purely mine, and as evidence suggests that that might be the case or might not be, I can add more to each memo and let it grow. There is potential for interviewer error in this, but it's pretty. But also, if you acknowledge yourself and who you are, then it's actually a really good opportunity for you to sort of identify and record how you're identifying underpinning themes and ideas. All right, well, I'm sorry that it took so long. I hope it was insightful. Please feel free to join into the Zoom lecture or tutorial on Tuesday at 12. I've realised that Moodle's been changing the dates on them a little bit, so I'll make sure that the date's set properly for next week's, so you can join if you have some questions for me. And yeah, hopefully I'll talk to you then. Cheers.